To this day, I have increasingly dark memories of my brother bankrupting me with hotels on Mayfair, the English version of Boardwalk, while I languished in jail. Hello, I'm Lawrence and I'm on a quest to uncover all of the memos that Britain and America lost in the pond, and one of those memos pertains to board games. Now, I think we all know what board games are. They're not games that you play when you're bored, although that does help. They are games that you play on a board. And today I'm going to be talking about some of the ways in which board games differ between Britain and America. Now, on my secret live stream this past Sunday, I had a conversation all about board games with my patrons, some of whom, including Uncle Toby, asked if this includes playing cards. And my answer was that it does not, because playing cards have so many differences that they warrant their own video, or 6 of hearts. It's also likely that there are other board games out there that could have made today's list. Today, I'll be focusing on 5, starting with this. Almost 2,000 years ago, a board game by the name of Moksha Patam originated in ancient India. It was intended as a morality lesson. As you climb the ladder of success, don't do bad deeds or you'll find yourself sliding down a snake. They'd not thought it through, but so long as you persevere and do the right thing, you'll eventually reach the top. And that, in a nutshell, is Moksha Patam, or as it's known in Britain, Snakes and Ladders. The problem with this morality lesson is that it's all entirely governed by the throw of a dice. In other words, success ultimately comes down to pure luck. Nonetheless, Snakes and Ladders is a popular board game marketed not so much to humans, but children. I should know, it was my favourite board game in 1987 when I was simply too fiscally irresponsible for Monopoly. Imagine my surprise when I first got off the plane in America and realised that there weren't any snakes, both within the game and on the plane. And that's because in the US, Moksha Patam goes by the name Chutes and Ladders. And it turns out this was not always the case. The game initially was marketed as Snakes and Ladders in the US, but American kids apparently didn't like snakes very much, presumably because they'd actually encountered them in real life. So in 1943, 40 years before the company was absorbed by Hasbro, Milton Bradley released Chutes and Ladders, a chute in this case being a kid's slide. And at first, that seemed more logical. Kids do this in real life, right? Up the ladder, down the slide. But what kind of morality lesson is that? You know, hey kids, please don't do bad deeds, otherwise you'll have to do your favourite thing ever, which is going down a slide. They'll be setting fire to your rug before you can say Marty McFly. On the other hand, most kids probably don't even pick up on the moral teachings of the game anyway, and even I was today years old when I discovered that Snakes and Ladders originated in ancient India, just like this game. Thousands of years ago, a game emerged in medieval India that would go on to be dubbed the national game of India. Designed for 2 to 4 players, it involves a cross-shaped board around which players move their pieces in accordance with the throw of not a dice, but shells. The winner is the person who gets all of their pieces to the centre first. The game's name? Pecheezy. And you don't have to have been raised in India for this to be familiar. American viewers might know the similar sounding game Parcheezy, a game distributed by Parker Brothers, before it was absorbed into Hasbro. The key differences are that the American game uses dice and, like most modern varieties, also includes home bases. My British compatriots know this game as Ludo, a name patented in England in 1896. Both games are pretty similar to the game Sorry, with just some subtle differences. For visual reference, Sorry, not sorry. That very game was launched in England in the 1920s and distributed by another English company, Waddington's, before it was absorbed into Hasbro. And it was that very company that gave the world our next entry. From Ludo to Cluedo, a chap by the name of Anthony Pratt, or A. Pratt to his enemies, invented the renowned murder mystery game in 1943, coincidentally the same year Chutes and Ladders launched. It could mean that that point in time inherently contains some sort of cosmic significance, almost as if it were the temporal junction point of the entire space-time continuum, sort of like how 1985 was for Christopher Lloyd's career. Anyway, it was launched in the US in 1949 under the name Clue, presumably because Americans weren't familiar with the word Ludo. However, that didn't stop Parker Brothers before the the company was absorbed by Hasbro, from using other European influences to market the game. To let audiences know that, hey, this is for all you detectives out there, they billed it as the great new Sherlock Holmes game. However, casual sleuths quickly observed that his image was neither on the box nor among the playable pieces. You'd think this stuff was elementary. But speaking of pieces, the US version diverged from the original by making slight character name adjustments. Instead of Reverend Green, it was Mr. Green. Instead of Mr. Black, it was Mr. Body, while Miss Scarlet was later spelled with just one T. In some versions of the US game, the dagger is a knife, while in old UK versions, the lead pipe is the lead piping. The common denominator here is that in almost every case, America went for the shorter phrase. The same is not true of our next entry. As we've already seen, some board games have been played throughout the world for several millennia. 3,000 years ago at Mesopotamia, people played a board game resembling one still in operation today: drafts. At least that's how I came to know it as an Englishman. Basically, this two-player game involves a board of 8 by 8 squares. The object is to move your pieces diagonally over your opponent's pieces until he or she has no pieces left, and that was not a weird euphemism. It evolved out of the game Alburquerque, a game introduced by Spanish settlers in New Mexico. Today, Americans know it as checkers, or if you're being formal, American checkers. This is not to be confused with the regional burger joint of the same name, and under no circumstances should you eat the pieces, with or without pickles. But it's also not to be confused with Chinese checkers, which, bonus entry, is spelled differently in Britain and America. In other news, drafts and/or checkers is one of the few games over which Hasbro has not formed a monopoly, unlike, this. Invented by game designer Lizzie Magie in 1904, a game known as the Landlord's Game would go on to be modified, and some would say outright stolen, to create what we know today as Monopoly. Ironically, despite being the original patent holder, Magie made just $500 on her creation, while Charles Darrow, a man who falsely claimed the idea as his own, became the first millionaire game designer in history. And you see, that's what happens when bad deeds are rewarded with a go on the slide. Monopoly went on sale in the US in 1935, and as it does today, the board featured streets located in Atlantic City, almost half of which were named after American states. But growing up, this wasn't my experience of the game. You see, before Monopoly was even released in the US, Parker Brothers contacted the newly formed British company Waddington's to offer overseas distribution rights. Impressed with the game, Waddington's upper management believed it would sell better if the American street names were replaced with British ones, and by British, they really meant London. After a scouting trip to England's capital, they settled on streets that adequately reflected the range from poor to affluent. And thus, the British version was born. To this day, I have increasingly dark memories of my brother bankrupting me with hotels on Mayfair, the English version of Boardwalk, while I languished in jail. In the most ironic incident since Barry Manilow's cover version of I Write the Songs, Waddington's and Parker Brothers were both absorbed by Hasbro, who maintain rights to Monopoly on either side of the pond. That's it for this episode. Let me know in the comments below some of your favourite board games and whether or not they differ on either side of the pond. My name is Lawrence Brown. You can follow me on Twitter at LostInThePondUS, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel so that my videos don't get lost in the pond. A big thank you to all of my patrons who, among other things, gave me the opportunity to play board games for research. If you would like to become a patron of Lost in the Pond and support the work that I do, you can do so at patreon.com/lostinthepond. Until next time, goodbye.